So for this webinar, we have eminent speaker, senior teachers from the Department of Medicine. They'll be talking on epidemiology and clinical features of COVID-19, investigation and management, and infection prevention and control practices. So Dr. Shilpa Devke, Dr. Anil Modak, and Dr. Vivek Pandey, all are senior associate professors from Department of Medicine. This webinar is specifically meant for the final year students. This is because you are going to be a part of healthcare system, and you are the one who can spread awareness about the COVID-19 to your near and dear ones. Secondly, the DME has given some letter that this training should be given to final year students, so that in case there is overwhelming or exponential rise in the patients, your services can be utilized in this COVID-19 pandemic for the sake under the supervision of the senior doctors. At the end of this particular webinar, you are supposed to know all these learning objectives to describe epidemiology and current global and local scenario of COVID-19, to describe clinical manifestation and complications of COVID-19, to enlist investigations in a patient with COVID-19, to outline management of COVID-19 as per clinical categorization, and lastly, to understand principles of infection control and prevention measures. So let me call the first speaker. Dr. Shilpa Devke, she is going to talk on epidemiology and clinical features of COVID-19. Over to Dr. Shilpa Devke.
I am Dr. Shilpa Devke. As Madam has kindly introduced me, I will be talking about epidemiology and clinical features of COVID-19, and I would like to welcome you all to this webinar. These are the headings under which I shall be discussing. COVID-19, as we all know, is a disease which is caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it is the latest threat to global health. Originated in the Wuhan province in China in early December, and from there it has spread rapidly all over the world, so that it was declared a pandemic by WHO on 11th of March 2020. These figures here indicating the total number of cases and the mortality are very alarming, and they seem to be rising day by day. On top of that, we all know that there is no treatment with proven benefit, neither is there any vaccine for prevention. These are the statistics in India. As we can see here, the new cases seem to be rising exponentially. The only solace is that the recovery rate has also increased, so that the net result is that the active number of cases seems to have dropped down. The agent which is responsible for COVID-19 is the novel coronavirus 19, and it was renamed the SARS-CoV-2 because of its similarity to the previously described coronavirus, that is the SARS. SARS and MERS, that is severe acute respiratory syndrome virus, and MERS, that is Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome virus, are the related viruses which belong to the same group of coronaviruses. The name of coronavirus is derived from the peculiar structure of the virus. This is because of the presence of the spikes or the S-glycoproteins on the surface of the virus. These appear as protuberances which resembles the solar corona. The name coronum is derived from the Latin word which means corona, crown. SARS and MERS were responsible for previous outbreaks. SARS was responsible for outbreak in the year 2003, whereas MERS was responsible for the outbreak in 2013. The size of the virus is 60 to 140 nanometer, and it is sensitive to heat as well as ultraviolet rays. But the range of temperature in which the virus can remain viable is quite large, and it can persist even in sub-zero temperatures. However, there is inactivation of the virus by certain solvents, lipid solvents, that is ether 75% and ethanol. Additionally, there is susceptibility to biocidal agents like the chlorine containing disinfectants. And this is the reason why we are using alcohol based sanitizers as well as disinfectants containing sodium hypochlorite. This is the structure of SARS-CoV-2 virus. As we can see here, there are the spikes or the spike glycoproteins on the surface which appear like protuberances. It deserves a special mention because this is the site of attachment of the virus to the host or the human epithelial cell, and this attachment is mediated via the ACE2 receptor. Additionally, the spike glycoprotein is also a major target for vaccine development. There are other proteins, that is the M protein and the envelope protein, which are there on the surface of the virus. MAM is an accidental host. Man is an accidental host, and infection probably jumped from bats to pangolin, which acted as an intermediate host. Human to human transmission has been documented, and if you look at the transmission cycle, it seems that the bat coronavirus underwent some sort of mutation because of which it became infective to man. Additionally, certain host risk factors predispose the host to development of moderate to severe disease, and these have to be kept in mind because these are the subset of patients who can develop moderate to severe disease, and these are the patients who can have more morbidity as well as mortality. So these risk factors are age more than 60 years, obesity, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, coronary artery disease, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease, immunosuppression and malignancy, COPD, and pregnancy. This is a study, one of the largest study carried out in UK, which described the various comorbidities which are seen in patients with COVID-19. And in this particular study, the most common comorbidity was chronic cardiac disease. This is the transmission cycle, as I've already told. Coming to the routes of transmission, the spread of coronavirus occurs from person to person. And in fact, we see that 85% cases are seen in families or in the close contacts. The routes of transmission are by respiratory droplet as well as aerosol. Aerosols are the smaller particles less than 10 micrometer in size, and because of their size, they tend to disperse for a longer distance in air, whereas droplets are larger particles, and these can be generated while the patient coughs, sneezes, or even while he breathes quietly. These droplets or aerosols, rather the droplets can be deposited on mucous membranes of the recipient, or indirectly there may be transmission from contaminated surfaces. They tend to drop down on the surfaces which become contaminated, and when a recipient comes in contact with these contaminated surfaces and touches his face, the infection is transmitted. This is a diagrammatic representation of the routes of transmission. We have to remember here that the major route of transmission is airborne, and that is why you have to take the airborne precautions. This is a slide which shows pathophysiology. As I've already told you, the SARS-CoV-2 virus attaches to the ACE2 receptors. These receptors are abundantly present on the human epithelial cell, which are present in the lungs, the endothelial cells of the vessels, the heart, and other organs in the body. Once this attachment has occurred, the host launches an immune response against the virus, and this is responsible for the elaboration of the various cytokines. Because of this, there is an increased local and systemic inflammatory response, and this ultimately contributes to the endotheliopathy and the hypercoagulability. Because of endotheliopathy, there is damage to the endothelium. This results in increased vascular permeability, and it causes interstitial as well as alveolar edema. The net effect of hypercoagulability and the endothelial damage is that there is a VQ or perfusion ventilation mismatch causing hypoxia. Hypoxia in turn perpetuates this cycle, causing more hypercoagulability and endotheliopathy. The net result that we get is that there is macrothrombosis, microthrombosis, there is inflammatory damage, damage to the type 2 pneumocytes in particular, that causes a collection of inflammatory debris in the alveoli, hyaline membrane formation, and this ultimately causes ARDS. The evidence of hypercoagulability can be had in the form of increased D-dimer and increased fibrogen levels, whereas markers of immune response can be seen in the form of raised total leukocyte count, as well as elaboration of the various cytokines, especially interleukin 6. Additionally, you can have the acute phase reactants because of the inflammation. The net result of the pathology which occurs because of this pathophysiology is you get to see vasculopathy, coagulopathy, hypercoagulability, and refractory ARDS. Coming to the clinical features of COVID-19, majority of patients with an infection will be asymptomatic. However, few percentage of patients may have symptoms, and predominant among these symptoms are fever, cough, and shortness of breath. So these are the classical triad of COVID-19. Patients can have fatigue, they can have expectoration, myalgia, rhinorrhea, sore throat, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting. Peculiar symptoms which can be there in COVID-19 are anosmia and ageusia, and these are said to be very specific for COVID-19 in the present scenario. Of 100 patients, if you look at the figures, you find that almost 80 to 85% patients may be having mild disease, whereas 14% patients may have a severe disease, 5 patients may require ICU, and the mortality rate is somewhere around 3 to 4%. This is again a study which quotes the predominant symptoms which are seen in patients with COVID-19. Coming to the clinical signs, a patient who is symptomatic for COVID-19 may have various clinical signs in the form of fever, tachycardia, tachypnea, hypoxia. Hypoxia can be monitored very well clinically by the bedside by carrying out pulse oximetry and measuring the oxygen saturation. Hypotension may be an evidence, may be a clue to the presence of sepsis or septic shock. 3-minute walk test deserves a mention here because some patients may have hypoxia, but they may not have overt clinical signs and symptoms. And here you have to do the SpO2 of the patient after a 3-minute walk and calculate the ratio of SpO2 to FiO2. Other clinical signs which may be present are respiratory signs because of ARDS, neurological signs. In cardiovascular system, you may have dangerous arrhythmias and as well as myocardial dysfunction. Patients with multi-organ failure may have acute kidney injury, or they may have evidence of hepatic involvement in the form of hyperbilirubinemia and raised transaminases. To find out which subset of patients may be having the severe disease or may be having the complications of COVID, you have to monitor certain bedside clinical signs. And these include the respiratory rate. These are fairly simple. Respiratory rate more than 24, SpO2 less than 94 on room air, confusion or drowsiness, hypotension, and presence of comorbidities, as I've already told. So these are the patients in whom you have to be very vigilant, and you have to monitor these patients, and you have to step up the treatment as and when needed. Few complications which deserve mention here, or rather the major complications because of COVID are ARDS. You can detect ARDS by the presence of new or worsening respiratory symptoms, along with chest imaging findings of bilateral opacities, and you have to do ABG of this patient and calculate the partial pressure of oxygen. And accordingly, you can categorize ARDS as mild, moderate, and severe. If PaO2 is not available, you can go for the SpO2 FiO2 ratio, as I've already told. Sepsis is a major complication which can occur in COVID-19, and it is often fatal. It is characterized by life-threatening organ dysfunction, and the signs of organ dysfunction may be because of involvement of the CNS, the respiratory system, the genitourinary system, or the cardiovascular system. So you have to carefully monitor the patients for these signs of deterioration or evidence of sepsis. Additionally, the patients can have laboratorial evidence of sepsis in the form of coagulopathy, thrombocytopenia, acidosis, high lactate level, or hyperbilirubinemia. Septic shock is another complication which can occur. It is defined as persistent hypotension despite volume resuscitation requiring vasopressors. And there can be other clinical signs which have to be carefully looked for, especially in children. This is a figure which shows the association of the various stages of inflammation with the viral response, the host immune response, and the clinical signs and symptoms. We find here that as the patient's staging increases from incubation to hyperinflammation phase, initially there is a viral response which goes down subsequently. This is followed by the host immune response, and this hyperinflammation is responsible for the severe disease manifesting as ARDS, sepsis, or organ failure. A similar diagram or similar figure which is showing the same thing is that you can see here that the viral response is going down, the host inflammatory response is increasing, and this corresponds with the clinical deterioration. Case definitions, these are as per the Government of India guidelines. You can classify the cases as suspect, probable, and confirmed. Clinical categories for management, these are important for management purposes, and accordingly you can classify the patients according to the clinical signs and symptoms. So it is classified as mild or early infection, moderate infection where there is pneumonia, and severe infection where the patients can have the severe complications of COVID-19. In mild group, you have group A, B, and C. Depending on the patient's symptoms and presence or absence of comorbidities. In moderate group, patients will have pneumonia but no other signs of severe disease. In severe group, patients will have complications in the form of ARDS, sepsis, and septic shock. To summarize, COVID-19 caused by SARS-CoV-2 is responsible for the current global pandemic. It's a zoonotic disease. It affects all age groups, but morbidity and mortality is more in the high-risk groups. Vasculopathy, coagulopathy, dysregulated immune response contribute to the clinical syndrome. Incubation period is 2 to 14 days. Period of infectivity is 2 days prior to symptom onset to 8 days later. Most infections are asymptomatic. Some may present with features ranging from mild disease to ARDS, sepsis, shock, or multi-organ failure. Higher mortality is seen in patients with comorbidities and complications. Vigilance is to be given or to be taken in patients with tachycardia, dyspnea, hypoxia, presence of comorbidities, and abnormal 3-minute walk test. So these are the red flag signs. I now invite Dr. Anil Modak sir for his presentation on investigations and management.
For investigation, you need a person whom you are going to investigate. So how to decide the person? Now there are clear-cut guidelines laid down by Government of India, the persons to be investigated. So once you decide or select the person, then you have to collect the sample. The appropriate clinical sample need to be collected by laboratory personnel or healthcare workers trained in specimen collection in presence of a clinician. Now once the sample is collected, then it has to be transported. So by following all biosafety precautions and using personal protective equipment, clinical samples need to be sent to the designated laboratories only. You can't send anywhere. Only those which are designated laboratories by following standard triple packaging. I'm going to repeat this again. You have to follow the standard triple packaging. And then this has to be sent in ice cool bag. Now, confirmation. There are two groups of investigations you are supposed to do. One is confirmatory test, confirmation for COVID, and second for prognostic point of view. So you can, by doing those prognostic tests, you can assess or label the patient in various categories. So confirmatory tests are, the gold standard is nasopharyngeal swab collected on a Dacron stick. There is no cotton stick, but it's a Dacron stick for RT-PCR, that is real-time polymerase chain reaction. This is the gold standard test, and if this test is positive, 100% the person is labeled as COVID positive case. In alternative things are oropharyngeal swab can be recorded. Then you can take, if patient is sick and intubated, even you can get ET aspirate, or that is bronchoalveolar lavage fluid also can be taken. But usually this is not practiced because it can give a lot of aerosols. Then for investigation of the community or large persons, you need a test which is more economical, is more sensitive, and it should be rapidly result should be rapidly available. So TrueNet test, which is recently developed by in our country, and this is antigen based test. If this test is positive, then you need not go for RT-PCR, but the sensitivity of this test is not much. So we have to, then if you are suspecting strongly, then you have to go for RT-PCR test. Second is rapid antibody test, that is IgG, IgM testing. So these are the indirect tests which suggest us that this person has been suffering or suffered from COVID-19 disease. We have to take help of imaging like X-ray chest, HRCT, and even bedside ultrasonography in sick patients. Now there are two pictures. The upper one is showing collection from the nasopharyngeal route, and second is the oropharyngeal route. So you can see clearly that the person who is collecting is well equipped with the necessary PPEs, that is face shield, then N95 mask, gowns, gloves, etc. So one should not attempt without these PPEs. Now, this, as I told you, RT-PCR is a gold standard, but it is positive only in 70% of cases, while 30% still you can't diagnose, maybe because of faulty collection or whatever may be the reasons. And as the time passes, the sensitivity of this test keeps on decreasing. So you have to be careful. So hence, if you are strongly suspecting and the case is negative, you have to repeat the test after 48 hours. The second is IgG, IgM. So IgM is positive during acute phase, while IgG is positive in more chronic condition where patient has already suffered from the disease. It will only tell us that patient has come in contact or patient has been contacted with COVID-19 virus. Now, prognostic investigations. So these are the investigations which will let us know the status of the patient and the category of the patient and the prognosis of the patient. So the CBC, as any other viral infection, the lymphocytic counts are decreased. So if you try to get the ratio of neutrophil to lymphocytic count, it will be more. And if the ratio is more than 3.5, it's a bad prognostic sign. Deranged KFT will suggest renal involvement. Deranged LFT will suggest hepatic involvement. Cardiac markers are deranged, then the top T, CPKMB, it will suggest the involvement of myocardium, and raised BNP will suggest the dysfunction of the myocardium. If prolactinemia is more, in that situation, it will suggest the possibility of added secondary bacterial infection. Inflammatory markers. I would wish that our patients should not have these raised inflammatory markers because they carry very bad prognosis, and they may even predict the possibility of cytokine storm. So these are ESR, CRP, interleukin 6, LDH, D-dimer, and ferritin. If these are raised, then they will suggest cytokine storm. X-ray chest findings depends upon at what stage of the disease you have taken the X-ray. In a very early stage, X-ray may be normal, although there may be a small patch of pneumonia which may not be detected by X-ray. And if the patient keeps on deteriorating rapidly, even hourly changes may be observed in X-ray, and within 48 to 72 hours, the whole lungs may appear opaque or white on X-ray. CT is very sensitive. The typical description is lower lobe predominance, peripheral predominance, multiple bilateral foci of glass ground opacities. Then various other descriptions like crazy paving, peripheral consolidation, and air bronchogram may be seen. So this is few pictures which is you can see here. The first left side there, this is a very small patch of pneumonia which otherwise would have been missed on X-ray. Then this is pneumonia has increased. This is crazy paving sign. So these are all things we can see on CT, which will help to confirm your diagnosis of COVID. USG thorax is a very important bedside investigation. It's often done in patients who are not or cannot be sent to the CT scan. So there are the various pictures which are showing uh, involvement of lung in the form of interstitial edema, more severe interstitial edema, and consolidation. Now, protocol for treatment of confirmed after having confirmed COVID and stage the patient, then you have to think of management. So, proposed clinical staging system already it has been described is mild, that is early infection, which has been grouped into three categories A, B, and C, and moderate stage, that is stage with early pneumonia with no signs of severe disease, and then severe disease with lot of complications like severe pneumonia, AIDS, sepsis, and septic shocks. Mild stage group A, the criteria already been told to you. So investigations are CBC, AFT, LFT, RBS, and ECG. Once you have investigated and found that these things are all within normal range, but still patient is COVID positive, he is called as group A patient, and he should be home isolated. If home isolated facilities are not available, then hospital isolation is recommended. Treatment only monitoring of the patient, and this patient should be given zinc, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, magnesium to improve the immunity with good diet and well hydration. Mild stage group B. Investigations needed all those for group A. In addition, this patient also need X-ray chest and SpO2 monitoring by pulse oximeter. So site of admission, again, home isolation is enough if that facility is available, otherwise hospital isolation. But this patient, they need daily follow-up. Treatment is symptomatic only, like antibiotic, adequate nutrition, and hydration. Mild stage group C. Investigations all for which we have done for group B. In addition, this patient will also need ABG, ESR, LDH, serum ferritin, D-dimer, and QTC. So to decide again whether patient still continues to be in group C only or is improving or deteriorating. Accordingly, we can then put him in various categories. Site of admission will be hospital isolation and daily follow-up. This patient cannot be kept at home. Now, red flag signs. The important thing, this will let us know whether this patient is deteriorating or is stable. So if you find the neutrophilic lymphocytic ratio is more than 3.5, it's a bad omen. PAF, that is PaO2 FiO2 ratio is less than 300, another bad omen. 3-minute walk test. First test the SpO2, and if after 3 minutes, if SpO2 drops, it's another bad sign. Then resting tachycardia more than 100, raised CRP, serum ferritin, D-dimer, LDS, triglycerides. Again, they are not good omen. And SpO2, if less than 94% at room air. If you find any of these or multiple combination of these, it means your patient is deteriorating. You should get an alert. Mild stage group C. The treatment is tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 mg twice a day on day 1, followed by 200 mg twice a day 4 days. Or you can give favipiravir 1800 mg twice a day, followed by 800 mg BD for 7 days. If needed, can be continued up to maximum of 14 days. Or patient can be given injectable remdesivir 200 mg OD for day 1 and 100 mg BD for next 4 days. So these two are recently introduced antiviral drugs and believed to be have a good response. Then, as you have been told, there is increased evidence of coagulopathy. It may be venous or arterial. So to prevent that, low molecular weight heparin, that is enoxaparin 40 mg subcutaneous OD is recommended. If your patient also has secondary bacterial infection, you can give tablet cefixime 200 mg BID or tablet augmentin 625 mg 3 times a day for 5 days, or it can be even given for 7 to 10 days. Now, moderate stage, where patient has low respiratory tract infection but of mild variety. The investigations are same as we have done for mild stage 3. The moderate stage red flag signs are similar. If your patient has NL ratio more than 3.5, PF ratio less than 300, then the 3-minute walk test shows drop in SpO2, then resting tachycardia. All these things, if you are seen in your patient, it means patient is deteriorating. The moderate stage treatment. The treatment again remains the same. The same antiviral drugs are to be used. You need to use heparin. In addition, if SpO2 goes below 88%, consider CARP protocol. This I will tell you afterwards. Then injection methylprednisolone 0.5 to 1 mg per kg per day for 3 days. And if D-dimer or serum ferritin levels are normal after 3 days, oral prednisolone in tapering dose for 5 days is to be given. Or if this is not available, you can use dexamethasone IV or oral 600 mg per day for 10 days. And patient also to be given high flow oxygen therapy. Then moderate stage treatment. Injection ceftriaxone 1 gram IV OD for 5 to 10 days. If patient satisfies the indication, then tocilizumab 8 mg per kg of body weight given slowly in 100 ml normal saline. Convalescent plasma. What is this? This is a plasma derived from a person who has recovered from COVID-19 infection and no more suffering from his COVID-19 now negative. These patients' plasma contain high antibodies. Possibly this can be used to counteract the virus in the patient who is suffering from COVID-19 at this moment. So this also can be given. If hydroxychloroquine cannot be given for any contraindication like prolonged QTc or G6PD deficiency, combination of ivermectin 12 mg oral single dose plus doxycycline 100 mg BD for 5 days can be considered. Now this is COVID awake repositioning pruning protocol. This is called as CARP protocol, where every 15 to 20 minutes a patient has to change his or her position. So this procedure may improve the oxygenation. Now severe stage. In adolescent or adult, fever or suspected respiratory infection plus one of the following, that is respiratory rate more than 30 breaths per minute, severe respiratory distress, and SpO2 less than 90 at room air. So this is the stage of ARDS. Oxygenation impairment in adult is PaO2 less than 200 mmHg is mild, less than 100 is moderate, and less than 100 at peak of 5 is severe ARDS. The severe stage treatment. Hospitalize the patient in COVID ICU. You cannot keep this patient in general ward. Injection, other treatment remains the same. That is specific treatment for virus. That is methylprednisolone or dexamethasone. Then these patients need more supportive therapy. As far as specific antiviral therapy is same, but supportive therapy is more important in this group. So oxygen therapy with reservoir bags 5 to 15 liters per minute and titrate flow rates to reach target of SpO2 more than 90. Hypoxemia, if there, then high flow nasal oxygen or NIV is preferred treatment than invasive ventilators. If patient don't respond within an hour or two, then think of invasive ventilators. Then sepsis. Already you have been told various signs and symptoms of sepsis in COVID. So management of septic shock. So in presence of sepsis, vasopressors are needed to maintain mean arterial pressure more than 65 and lactate is more than 2 millimole per liter is in absence of hypovolemia is called as septic shock. Give at least 3 ml per kg of normal saline or lactate to these patients for 3 hours. Watch for volume overload. If volume overload is there, either reduce the infusion rate or stop it. Perfusion targets include mean arterial pressure more than 65, urine output more than 0.5 ml per kg per hour, and improvement in skin mottling, capillary refill, and level of consciousness and lactate levels. So indication for intubation, persistent hypoxemia, SpO2 below 88% on Venturi mask, respiratory rate more than 30 beats per minute, systolic BP less than 90 in spite of IV fluids and vasopressor, and Glasgow coma scale less than 8. Cytokine syndrome, it's an hyperinflammatory syndrome characterized by permanent fetal hypercytokinemia with multi-organ failure. Cardinal features are unremitted fever, cytopenia, pyridine levels are raised, and ARDS. The treatment, steroid, IV immunoglobulins, cytokine blockage, anakinra, and tocilizumab and JAK inhibition. So, in summary, we all are aware that this is a new disease, so not much knowledge is available. This presentation is based upon the guidelines published by Government of Maharashtra on 22/6/2020, and these are totally different than the guidelines which were published in February. So every day we are getting more knowledge, and accordingly guidelines are changing. So availability of vaccine may have some impact on prevention. So thank you very much for the pressure and listening. I request Dr. Vivek Pandey for his deliberation on infection control and prevention practices in COVID pandemic.
Good afternoon, audience. So my topic is infection prevention and control practices to be practiced in current COVID pandemic. So in current COVID pandemic, whenever the patient visits a hospital, the steps to be taken are: number one, screening. The first thing is patient is to be screened whether patient is likely to have COVID infection or not. Second step is, once we have decided that patient is having COVID infection, likely to have COVID infection, we have to immediately implement the IPC. IPC stands for Infection Prevention and Control Measures. The laboratory testing and clinical management has already been covered by previous speakers. Screening OPD, it is also called fever OPD, or it is called screening area, or some places it is called emergency room, or even in casualty, patient may come with the complaints. So at first point of contact, I repeat, at the first point of contact, screening has to be done to decide whether the patient is likely to have COVID infection or not. So once it is decided the patient is likely to have COVID infection, the healthcare worker has to initiate immediately infection prevent control measure at the point of entry of patient to the hospital. I repeat, the IPC, infection control measures, are to be initiated at the point of entry of patient to the hospital. Now, temperature should be taken by digital thermometer. The suspected patient and their relatives or their attendant should be given 3-layered mask, and they should be instructed to stay in a separate dedicated room and should be directed to stay in that particular area. The relatives of the attendant should be asked to maintain 2-meter distance from suspected patient. Now, all patients as well as their relative attendants should follow contact and droplet precaution, which I am going to discuss in subsequent slides. Now, screening area or fever OPD or emergency room or the casualty, we have to ask some questions to reach to some conclusion. Number one, whether there is a history of travel to the foreign country or red zone or containment zone in preceding 14 days prior to visit to the hospital. These questions are applicable for patient, their relative, their close friends and close contacts. Second question, you are patients or their close contact have been advised home quarantine by local health authorities. Third question, have any of the patient or their family member come in close contact with the patient who has got confirmed COVID-19 reports in preceding 14 days. Now, symptoms are to be asked to patient, and they are fever, cough, sore throat, breathlessness, and other symptoms have been elaborated by previous speakers. Now, nasopharyngeal swab is required for diagnosis. After this much evaluation, we shift the patient to appropriate ward, whether it is ICU or general ward. Now, standard precautions. Standard precautions are the precautions which are applicable to all the hospital, whether they are treating COVID patient or not. And they include hand hygiene. Recommend hand wash is must. Number two, PPE guided risk assessment. The PPE means personal protective equipment. Next is cough etiquette. The cough etiquettes are to be used by an individual who is coughing or sneezing at all places. For example, the mask is to be used in current scenario, in current pandemic, or if mask is not available, the rumal or the paper napkin can be used and it can be thrown as a disposable measure. This is very important because it prevents spread of infection to others. Here, others means patient's relative, patient's social contacts, patient's friend, and healthcare worker, and other general public also. The next four measures are applicable to all the hospital, and they are prevention of injuries, safe waste management, disinfection of equipment, environmental cleaning. These four measures are to be applied or to be done by all the hospital, whether they are treating COVID patient or not. Now, hand hygiene. This picture shows you correct technique of hand hygiene. The picture number 1 shows rubbing palm to palm. Picture number 2 shows rubbing finger to finger. Picture number 3 shows rubbing of the back of the hand. Picture number 4 shows rubbing of the base of the thumb. Picture number 5 shows rubbing of the back of the fingers. Picture number 6 shows rubbing of fingernail. Picture number 7 shows rubbing of the wrist. And at the end, rinsing of the hands with the water and drying it. This technique should be carried out in 20 to 30 seconds for proper disinfection of the hands. Now, social distancing. Lot has been said about social distancing, and this picture clearly demonstrates that a 2-meter distance should be maintained as far as possible by all of us during our social visits. Next is cough etiquette. There are 3 pictures which shows the cough etiquette. One is individual using the mask. If mask is not available, rumal or handkerchief or the paper napkin can be used to prevent the spread of infection from patient to the general public and healthcare worker in a hospital. If neither the rumal, neither the mask, neither the handkerchief is available, then individual's armpit can be used to prevent spread of infection to the public, as shown in one of the pictures here. Now, droplet precautions. The droplet precautions include triple layer mask to be used by healthcare worker if that healthcare worker is working within 1 to 2 meters of radius of patient. Then the patients should be kept in single room. If single room is not possible, then the one specific ward dedicated for COVID patient should be used. Then healthcare workers should protect eyes by face masks or goggles. Then patient movement should be limited within the institution. Ideally, they should not move their ward. If at all they are required to move out of their ward or room, they should wear the medical mask. Contact precautions. The contact precautions are required to prevent the transmission of virus by touching the various surfaces like the door, electrical appliances, equipment, and furniture. So whenever entering the COVID ward, COVID ICU, COVID OPD, PPE is that must be immediately used, and that PPE should be removed on the completion of duty while leaving the COVID ward. The disposable PPE instrument should be used, but if the disposable BP instrument, stethoscope, thermometer are not available, then dedicated equipment should be used. And if these equipments are required to be used for non-COVID patients, in such scenario, the instrument is to be disinfected every time. Avoid contaminating the environmental surfaces not related to the patient care directly. Then ensure the adequate room ventilation in the room where patient is located. Avoid unnecessary movement of the patient and perform frequent hand hygiene. Now, airborne precautions include the procedures which lead to aerosol generating procedures. The ward where aerosol generating procedures are conducted, we have to use the airborne precaution. And these procedures include suction of the throat, suction of respiratory secretion, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, intubation, bronchoscopy. Then healthcare worker has to ensure that adequate PPE is to be used. The adequacy of PPE will be shown to you in next slide. Whenever possible, adequately ventilated room should be used, which should have a negative pressure to ensure the minimum 12 air exchange per hour. The next step is avoid presence of unnecessary individual in that room. Now this chart shows the total 9 scenario. The top 6 scenario are triage OPD, fever OPD, screening OPD. Next is the registration counter. Third is the temperature recording station. Fourth is a waiting area. Fifth is the doctor's chamber in OPD. Sixth is the clinical management in isolation room. Now these 6 places carry a moderate risk of transmission of the COVID virus infection to healthcare worker at moderate risk level. And therefore, all the healthcare workers should use N95 mask and gloves at these 6 places. Now, remaining 3 places like ICU, critical care, where the aerosol generating procedure are carried out. SARI ward. SARI means severe acute respiratory infection. In such patients are kept in that ward till COVID infection report is coming. So, SARI ward and during sample collection. So, last 3 scenario, there is a very high risk of transmission of COVID virus infection to the healthcare worker. Therefore, all these scenario, healthcare workers should use N95 mask, gloves, gown, goggles, head cover, and shoe cover. Now, this picture shows you personal protective equipment. On the left side, there is a head cover, then there is a mask, then the middle picture shows you foot cover, then the gown, then the picture on your right side shows the goggle and gloves. Now, lastly, we come to the donning and doffing sequence of our PE. The donning sequence include hand wash, wear cap, wear shoe cover, then again hand wash, winner ear glove, winner cover or use gown, wear gown, then wear the N95 mask or surgical mask, then wear goggle, then wear hood, and then wear the outermost gloves. Now, doffing sequence should be followed very, very slowly and meticulously so that the spread of infection is avoided by tear of the protective gears. The first step is washing, then hand wash, followed by removal of outer gloves, removal of hood, removal of the gown, then again hand wash, then removal of shoe cover, then again hand wash, then removal of goggles, then removal of N95 mask, then again hand wash, then removal of cap, and then again hand wash, then again removal of inner gloves, and followed by hand wash. This is the site shown in this slide, which is on this side on YouTube. The doffing and donning video is available freely in YouTube. However, I will also put this in the Google Classroom for benefit of MBBS students. Thank you very much for patient listening.